hand over to Lynn to run the session for you, and I'll just sort of sit in the background. If you need anything, let me know.
That's great. Thanks a million, Margot. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear and can see me. Thank you so much for joining the session today. It's always a little bit challenging when we do things using technology, and we've got a lot of you logging in from home, etc. So I really, really appreciate your time today. Just a couple of little housekeeping rules. If you can put your microphones on mute so that we're not getting any background noise in there. And if you've got any questions or anything, just pop your questions into the chat box. I'd prefer not to answer them as we're going along. I can answer those at the end. If there's anything that I can't answer that might be related to your systems, etc., I'm sure Meredith will be able to help you with that. So I'm Lynn McVie. I'm a palliative care improvement facilitator, and I'm working with the Adelaide Primary Health Network. I have had a lot of experience in aged care and community care over many, many years. I've really had a passion for palliative care and aged care, and when this project came along some 18 months, 2 years ago, I came back from retirement to be involved because I'd done my palliative nursing degree at Flinders University and really felt that I wanted to be involved in something where I felt that I could make a difference. So just a little bit about, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about the project. My colleague Julie Armitage was also involved in the project with me, but she's now gone to work with SA Health. So I'll give you a little bit of info about the project, and then you'll see how it all fits together. It's a Commonwealth government funded project known as Greater Choice for At-Home Palliative Care. There's 11 primary healthcare networks across Australia involved with the funding from the Commonwealth in this project. They all took on very, very different types of project activity to conduct. In South Australia, it was decided that we would work with residential aged care around advanced care planning. We'd really identified that there was a need there and that's what we would do. We called for, the PHN called for expressions of interest from organisations because we really needed that buy-in from your organisation, that you were prepared to be a part of the project and would have that commitment to support it and participate. And Kalara was one of 8 organisations that signed up for the project. And under those 8 organisations, Julie and I worked with 28 facilities. So basically, the aim of the project was to quality improve the process of advanced care planning in residential aged care. A process to achieve an advanced care plan for every resident that documented goals of care from admission through any change in health status to end of life. Was about starting the planning early and not waiting until the resident deteriorated, and then there would be a mad rush to try and get things in order because we didn't know what the resident wanted, and it was a very emotional time. So really getting things going early. Just before we go any further, should have a pile of documents there. I haven't done this in a PowerPoint today. There was a comment last week that it might have been better, but I haven't done it in a PowerPoint because I think it's nice for you to have the documents in front of you. I think doing it in an electronic format like this, you do lose the flavour of the documents. And I think if you've got them in front of you, you're actually able to refer to them, scribble on them and do what you like as a prompt for you. So basically the process we took with the 28 facilities that we had on board, we mapped all of their advanced care planning process from admission through to end of life. We sat down with a number of the registered nurses who were involved in admission and some of the clinical leads, and we looked at the processes. So we mapped it out for every single facility. And the findings from that mapping drove a process of change using a quality improvement framework. there were some very consistent themes that came through across those 28 aged care facilities. And I think it's really important that I just share some of those themes with you, because I think you'll then understand why the process has been developed as it has and why there really needed to be a change. So I'm just going to read a few of those out for you. On admission...
Yes, the voice is cutting.
Can we just make sure all of our mics are on mute, please? Yeah, someone. Yep. On admission, less than 1% of residents had an advanced care directive or an alternative advanced care plan. If they had a plan or a directive, it often lacked detail, it was incomplete, it wasn't signed, it wasn't witnessed, a number of things. A small number of residents had documents that preceded the advanced care directive, like medical power of attorney, enduring power of guardianship, etc. And those documents also often lacked a lot of detail. Most residents had an enduring power of attorney, and we found that a lot of aged care staff were actually referring to the decision maker in the enduring power of attorney when they discussed advanced care planning. So basically, the enduring power of attorney was for financial affairs and not necessarily the person that would be making those decisions. Advanced care planning documents were considered to be confusing. All of the organisations used different documents. They called them all sorts of different things, from advanced care directives, even though they weren't the legal documents, to various types of plans. So there were a lot of documents that facilities had generated themselves and were using as advanced care plans. There was a very, very strong focus on resuscitation. That really seemed to drive advanced care planning. That was something that was discussed in admission, and it was something that was considered, you really had to know the status of CPR for the resident. The family accompanying the resident were often asked to complete the documents. They were given plans or documents to take home and asked to complete those documents and bring them back. Often they weren't returned, often weren't completed with the resident as being the central point. It was often what the family wanted and not what the resident wanted. There was no formal conversation around residents' values, wishes, preferences, and those decisions that might lie ahead, especially around healthcare. And admission wasn't considered to be the right time to have those advanced care planning conversations. There are more in-depth conversation, and there isn't time on day of admission, but there seemed to be a real urgency with every facility that they needed to know what the resident CPR status was. Nurses generally found the conversations confronting. There was no supported decision-making process that includes residents who don't have that full decision-making capacity. Advanced care planning conversations normally took place when the resident had deteriorated and was in the terminal phase of life. There were no triggers in the system that flagged a review of the advanced care plans or directive. We often just ticked boxes and said, yes, it was in place, but nobody had really looked at what is the content of it, or go back and review it and say, is this really relevant now? Also, they weren't reviewed at care plan review. So they were some of the key findings. So I think you can see where we're going to from there as to why there needed to be some changes. So really, I'm going to discuss with you, and I hope that you'll walk away today with a good understanding of what advanced care planning and supported decision making is, that you'll understand your role in the process and procedure that your facility is adopting around advanced care planning, and that you'll understand the tools to support advanced care planning, how to use them and when to use them. You've got should have a little document there in front of you about what advanced care planning actually is, but I'll just briefly talk to that. It's really what matters to you about you. So you're looking at your resident, what's really important to them about your health, and at such time as you are dying, what you might want at that point in time. Advanced care planning should be a routine part of healthcare, when a person's values, preferences, fears, concerns, etc. are discussed openly, and their healthcare preferences can be respected at a time when they cannot voice their decisions themselves. I like two words in this. It is the voice of the resident and the choice of the resident. So it sits very, very well with your accreditation standards, that you're listening to what your resident's saying and you're respecting what your resident actually wants. It's about also appointing a substitute decision maker to communicate your preferences to others when you're unable to do so yourself. Now, this may be done through a formal process. Advanced care plans can consist of a variety of different documents. The gold standard is the Advanced Care Directive, and that is a legal document. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around the Advanced Care Directive because I don't think it's necessary at this point in time. I think you need to understand that that's what the legal document is. There are some very, very specific guidelines that go with completing that legal document. And I think the most important part about it is that the person must have capacity to complete the document. It must be completed in the first person. You can't complete a document for a resident, and family shouldn't be completing it for a resident. They can assist their loved one to complete it, but it must be completed in the first person, reflecting what that person actually wants. And I can't stress that enough. There are informal documents. They might consist of something that's written on a piece of paper. They could consist of a conversation that the resident has had with the family in the past. They may be a 7-step pathway. There's a variety of documents, and as much as the Advanced Care Directive is the only legal document, those other documents that preferences and wishes, etc., are documented on need to be respected, because they are something that the resident may have written at some time but haven't actually done a formal Advanced Care Directive. I think the other thing around Advanced Care Directives, as we said, less than 1% of residents are coming into aged care with a directive. If they do come, often it may have been completed 10 or 12 years previously. It's not reflective of where that resident is at this point in time. It doesn't reflect their future preferences, and they may not have the capacity when they come in to complete another document. And we found that this was a big need in residential aged care, and this is where your other documents were coming into play, because your resident didn't have a directive, they weren't able to complete one, and we ended up with a huge number of different documents that were used by facilities. So during the project, we trialled a document called My Life's Decisions, which I'll talk more about later. But that's a document that's been developed by an academic called Margaret Brown, and it's based in a supported decision-making framework. So it's really based for those residents that don't have the capacity to complete the legal document, but they are able to communicate a number of their wishes, and they're supported by their family to be able to do that. So we'll discuss that a little bit further down the track. I think the other thing that is also on that document that I gave you around advanced care planning and supported decision making, just briefly on capacity. I think often family will come in and say, you know, mum has dementia, she can't make those decisions. I think we need to be very clear about what capacity actually means. And a person is presumed to be capable of making a decision about their lives unless there is evidence to the contrary. And I think we always need to remember that. There are some things that our residents can communicate to us quite well. There's some things they can't. And it's really important that unless it's proven otherwise, we need to involve them in that conversation. regardless of what families say, family need to be able to stand in the resident's shoes, and we need to be able to involve them. And a person's decision-making capacity can fluctuate from time to time, and you know your residents, and you know that sometimes morning's better, afternoon's better, or whatever. But I think we just need to be sure that capacity is there unless we can prove otherwise. Just in relation to the importance of advanced care planning, the benefits of it, it builds some really good family relationships for you. You're having some conversations with your resident and your family, and you're building that rapport. And I think the rapport and trust in aged care is a really, really important thing in this current climate. We've seen interstate where there have been a number of issues, and I think we really have to be communicating and having those conversations very, very openly with our residents and family. COVID in itself has given us an amazing opportunity to address advanced care planning. As much as we've had a lot of other things to do in relation to COVID, it is that incredible opportunity for advanced care planning. It saves time when the resident starts to deteriorate. We haven't got that mad rushing around thinking, oh my goodness, we haven't got a plan, or we've got one here and it doesn't really reflect what the resident wants. We've got a very emotional family because their loved one's deteriorating, and decisions can be made at that point in time that may not be in line with what the resident really wanted. Family may make the decision and decide, I want to send my loved one to hospital, and that may not have been really what the resident wanted. So we really need that very clear, concise plan to follow, starting soon after admission, sitting down and having that conversation with the resident and family. And this is a very, very different conversation to what we as nurses have had. In the past, we've got our assessment forms there. We need to complete things. We need to tick boxes. We need to write information and so forth. This is really sitting down and having a casual conversation with your resident and your family. And we'll go a little bit more into that in a little while. But we really need to incorporate advanced care planning as business as usual. You wouldn't not do a pain assessment, you wouldn't not do a mobility assessment, etc. Advanced care planning needs to get into that category. Every time the resident deteriorates, we need to be looking at our advanced care plan. When they come in for admission, what have they got in place? What is it telling us? At review, what have we got? It's not about ticking a box. It's about looking at what is there and what is it telling us. And I'll probably go over and over this, and you'll leave here and you'll say, this is a very repetitive woman, but I really need to get that over to you, because I think very much in the past we've ticked, yes, there's an advanced care directive there, and we've not really looked at the relevance of it at the point in time when the resident comes in and exactly what it's telling us. So I think that's covered advanced care planning fairly well. I can't stress more than it really is in a supported decision-making framework. And I've just got a little thing here just on supported decision-making. It's the process of enabling a person who requires decision-making to support to make and or communicate decisions about their own life. The decision-making is supported, but the decision is theirs. And I think this is where we go back again to the focus on the resident. The resident must be the centre of all of that decision-making. And I can't stress that enough. I know family can be really quite pushy in this regard and want decisions made on what they feel are the right decisions for their loved one, but it needs to be focused on the resident. I know in the past as an aged care manager, I often found it easy to default to family. It was quite simple, and I've got to say I was very, very guilty of it. But having gone through this, working through this project, I've really realised the absolute importance of the resident being the central focal point of all of this. So I'm going to talk to you now about the advanced care planning process and procedure that Kalara is wanting to adopt. So this procedure and process were developed through the project. As we worked through, we found we really needed some guidelines and some very clear step-by-step guidelines for registered nurses to follow. Something that was easy, that anybody could pick up and say, right, at admission, I need to do this. At deterioration, I need to do that. At review, I need to do that. At end of life, I need to do that. I've probably, in moving forward with this, I've missed one important thing. As part of the process, we appointed a lead nurse to each of the facilities, the 28 facilities that were involved in the process. And Meredith is your lead nurse. And Julie and I as facilitators worked very, very closely with the lead nurses to get things going within your organisations. I think the unfortunate part of the lead nurse role has been that everybody sees the lead nurse as the doer. The person that, here, I'll give you this, you do this. You complete the SPICT, you complete this. Well, that's not the way it's going to be. From here on in, registered nurses really need to be involved in the whole process. The lead nurse is there to support you, but they are not the doer. You people on the floor are the doers. So I'll go through the process, actually the procedure, and you'll be able to see there where you actually come in and what you need to do and why you need to do it. You've got two documents there. You've got a pathway and a procedure. I'm going to use the procedure in this process. The pathway is fairly broad. The procedure gives you a real step-by-step of what you need to do. I'm going to just talk you through that, and then I'm going to talk about the documents or the tools that underpin that procedure. So you should have an advanced care planning procedure document there in front of you. So the first step is you've got a new resident coming in, and the registered nurse provides that resident on day of admission with the preparing for an advanced care planning conversation brochure that should be in your admission pack. Some of the facilities are putting that in their pre-admission packs, but most are putting it in their admission packs. So you've got your new resident and family coming in, and you're going to provide them with that. Now that document needs a little bit of context to underpin it. You're giving it to them because you're going to have an advanced care planning meeting with them in 2 to 3 weeks' time. And this is what we're going to talk about. So that document is just an information document for them to take away. They can write things on it. They can talk to other family members that can't come to the meeting, and they can make note on that document and bring it back when they come back to have that sit-down advanced care planning conversation. It's not a document for you to take back and file away or do anything with. It is really just an information document there. So you're giving them that information at time of admission and saying, right, we're going to have a meeting in 2 weeks' time. We're going to sit down and have an advanced care planning conversation with you. And this is what we are going to be talking about. And if it's possible on that day of admission, locking in a meeting time for 2 to 3 weeks' time, not always possible, but if it can be done then that's really, really good if you can lock in that meeting date. If the resident is so going to step 2, if the resident is unwell on admission, then the registered nurse would be needing to lock in that advanced care planning meeting a lot sooner. You may be needing to have it within a day or 2, depending on the state of the resident. So you're really needing to determine on day of admission just how stable your resident is and how long you may be able to leave it until you have that meeting. But we're hoping that it will be embedded into practice. It will be within approximately 3 weeks' time. So step 3 is the registered nurse completes the SPICT and the surprise question. And we will talk further about the SPICT after I've gone through the procedure. So the SPICT is the Supportive Palliative Care Indicators tool. It's really a deterioration tool, but on admission, we're asking you to complete it so that you've got some sort of baseline as to where your resident is at time of admission. And the SPICT would also be a trigger for you if you needed to have that sit-down advanced care planning conversation sooner. So it's really a bit like a triage tool. You complete your SPICT, resident's quite stable, okay, we have our meeting in 3 weeks' time. SPICT is telling you the resident is ticking a number of indicators on that form that they are deteriorating and you need to have that meeting sooner. Also asking the surprise question at time of admission. So that surprise question is framed probably more in a cancer type diagnosis, but in an aged care, I would always frame it looking at a 6-month time frame. But basically the surprise question was originally based around 12 months. Would you expect this person to die in the next 12 months? So it's really asking yourself that question. I think with the frailty of people coming into aged care now, I think 6 months is a good time frame. Would you be surprised if this person died within the next 6 months? That again supports your SPICT around deterioration and triggers you to have a look at what advanced care planning have we got in place for this resident. So new residents come in, do they have a directive, an advanced care directive? Do they have a plan of any kind? And just checking that at time of admission, because that will be discussed in more depth when you have your meeting in 3 weeks' time. So really, going back to the SPICT, it's a baseline tool for you. It's a trigger to check what advanced care planning information you've got, and it can be used as a triage tool to determine when you have that advanced care planning meeting. So moving on to step 4, the registered nurse meets with the resident and family and facilitates that advanced care planning conversation in line with the questions of My Life's Decisions or the advanced care directive. So if the resident's got an advanced care directive in place, at that meeting, you'll be referring to that document and discussing the content of it. Whether it's reflecting where the resident's currently at, is there enough information there about future healthcare decisions, etc. And if it is a document that isn't very well completed and the resident has the capacity to complete another advanced care directive, you would be asking them to do that. If they no longer have the capacity to do that, you would then be using the My Life's Decisions for those residents without the capacity to complete the advanced care directive. The advanced care directive is, as I said before, the gold standard. We can't force anybody to complete it, but it is the legal document that is recognised. In the near future, Meredith will continue to have those advanced care planning conversations and meetings with the family. We'll gradually get you as the registered nurses in on those meetings and start to get you educated around how those meetings are conducted. As I said, they're a very, very different conversation, and it is a skill to be able to have those conversations. And with some of you, it'll come to you naturally, and others of you will find it challenging. So Meredith will be having those meetings in the foreseeable future, but we'll want you as the RNs to be involved in the SPICT and the surprise question, giving out the brochure and admission. And when you've done the SPICT and surprise question, making a progress note entry. You've completed the SPICT, you've completed the surprise question, And this is what it's telling me. It doesn't have to be in depth, but it needs to be some information there saying, what have you found and what are you going to do about it? So moving on then to step 5. At that meeting, Meredith will complete the My Life's decision document, and she'll give it back to the family to look at the document and give their verification that it reflects what the conversation was that they'd had, and that is what the residents' wishes are. And they then can sign off on that document, and that document is then filed away as your advanced care plan. I can't be clear enough that the My Life's Decisions is not a legal document. The only legal document is the Advanced Care Directive. The registered nurse discusses that following that completion, family have signed off on the My Life's Decisions, or you've got a good Advanced Care Directive and you've discussed that. Following that, the registered nurse discusses the advanced care plan with the GPs. And I think with the GP, the resident's GP, and I think Meredith's been doing most of this, and asks them then to sign off on a 7-step pathway. So the 7-step pathway is an SA Health document, and it is recognised by SA Ambulance and also by SA Health in the hospital setting. So you've got your My Life's Decisions completed, and you're going to overlay it with a 7-step pathway that speaks to SA Ambulance, speaks to SA Health. So you're able to transcribe from your My Life's Decisions onto your 7-step pathway, and that document is there should ambulance transfer or hospital admission be required, because they will recognise that document, but they will not recognise My Life's Decisions. If you've got a well-facilitated advanced care directive in place, well then they'll recognise that document. And there probably isn't the necessity to put a 7-step pathway over it if there is a really well-written advanced care directive. But if there is not, I would be doing the 7-step pathway. So following that process, all your documents need to be stored in whichever way you're going to store them. I've had some discussion with Meredith. I think you're working that out at the moment with where that's going to be in iCare and how that's going to look, so that there's a consistent approach around storing documents. There's nothing worse if you are an agency person or you're someone that doesn't work very often and something happens with a resident and you think, oh my goodness, where are those documents? Do I need to send them to hospital? What am I doing in this situation? So it's important that everybody knows where those documents are, and they can put their hand on them at any point in time. And those documents need to be kept up to date. If a new document is completed, it's really important that the old one is archived and that the current document is there at all times. So moving on from that, we then go to if the resident's health status declines, so at any time of deterioration, the SPICT and the surprise question must be completed. So you as the RNs, you're noting deterioration in a resident, complete the SPICT, complete the surprise question, and do a progress note entry. What is it telling me, and what am I going to do about it? The resident has deteriorated, the plan we've currently got in place isn't reflective of what's required. We need to sit down and have a conversation. And as I said, at this point in time, Meredith will do that, but you need to do the SPICT and the surprise question, and your action there would be to get that information to Meredith so that a family meeting can be conducted as soon as possible. So any deterioration, so you may end up with 10 or 12 SPICs for a resident. As we know, with chronic disease, we've got this up and down trajectory, and things will change and then stabilise, change, and so forth. So a SPICT at all deterioration, and a SPICT completed when a resident comes back from a hospital admission. all hospital admissions. I've had some of my lead nurses say, well, what if they just go in and they come back and it's nothing very much? It needs to be completed at all times and a progress note entry made according to what you find. Why the resident went in, they're quite stable now, no further action required. Or they are deteriorating and we need to have a sit-down family conversation about this. And I think that's really important, because if you've got residents that are going to and from hospital regularly, you've got to be sitting down and talking with family and coming up with some decision about how you're going to manage this. And I think one of the important parts of the conversation in that decision making is, what can you as a facility offer? And I think this is a very important part of your advanced care planning conversation. I think there's a lot of adverse publicity around. The Royal Commission is certainly going to come out with a lot of recommendations. And I think there's been a lot of trust has been lost in aged care. And I think we really have to build that. And part of that conversation is, what can we offer you for your loved one to stay here? You've had numerous hospital admissions or whatever it might be. We need to discuss what that looks like and how we as a facility can manage it. And none of this is about keeping people out of hospital. It's about following what their plan is. There's times that residents are going to have to go to hospital for treatments, etc. We understand that. It's not about not treating our residents. It's about being very, very clear about what they actually want and when it's appropriate for them to go to hospital and when it's not. The SPICT and surprise question needs to also be completed at care review. So you need to get that embedded into your care review process. You review everything else about your resident at your routine care review. So SPICT and surprise question must be completed at that point in time. And it shouldn't be difficult, because you're reviewing everything. So you're going to have all of that information in front of you. And the SPICT is a very, very easy tool to use. And again, progress note, short entry saying, what is it telling me? What am I going to do about it? So that's really the advanced care planning procedure in detail, from admission through to end of life. So just summing that up, registered nurses will be involved at admission, giving out the brochure, doing the SPICT, completing the surprise question, and organising an advanced care planning meeting for 2 to 3 weeks' time or earlier if the resident is unwell. Meredith will conduct at the moment those advanced care planning meetings and conversations, and she'll get you people involved with them as we move along. 7-step pathway completed by GP to overlay My Life's decisions, because it's not a legal document. Documents will be filed away in a consistent place so that everybody knows where they are. And SPICT and surprise question will be completed following all deterioration, hospital admission, and at all care reviews. We need to embed it as business as usual. How are we all going? Okay? I'm doing a lot of talking, and because we don't have huge amounts of time, and I'm more than happy if you've got questions, just put them in the chat box down the bottom and we'll look at them at the end. So we'll just talk through the documents now. The preparing for an advanced care planning document there, you should have a copy of that. That's the document that will be in your admission pack to be given out to resident and family on day of admission. And again, just for them to take away as an information, for them to write a few ideas down and talk to you about when they come back to the meeting. Now, the SPICT tool, as I said, is the Supportive and Palliative Care Indicators tool. It is a deterioration tool, but filling it out at admission gives us a baseline to work on, and something that we can reflect back on when the resident deteriorates. So it's a tool used to recognise deterioration and it triggers advanced care planning. So it's really got a joint role in, recognizing deterioration, and then again, what is it telling me, and doing something about it. So just looking at the SPICT, you should have a copy of that there. The SPICT is divided into two sections. It's divided into general indicators and its clinical indicators. There's actually three sections, and the review of current care and care planning. So your general indicators shouldn't be too difficult. There's a little radio button at the side there that you just tick if the resident fits into that category. So you've got a new resident coming in. If they've had any unplanned hospital admissions in recent times, you're going to be ticking that box. Their performance status is poor or deteriorating with limited reversibility. This would probably fit more for your resident, that you're going to need to have those conversations considerably sooner. Depends on others for care due to increasing physical or mental health problems. Well, a lot of you, not too many of your residents are going to be coming in where they're not going to be needing. They're depending more on care and assistance. They've had progressive weight loss, so you're going to determine that at time of admission. Family or the resident are going to tell you, I've lost 4 kilos in the last 3 months or whatever. So you'd be ticking that box. They've got persistent symptoms despite optimal treatment of underlying condition. So that might relate to a number of different things. They might have chronic airways disease. They could be quite short of breath, and these symptoms are quite persistent for them. So you would be ticking that box. And the person asks for palliative care, chooses to reduce, stop, or not have treatment, or wishes to focus on quality of life. That may not come at time of admission, but it certainly may come with SPICs that you are completing later on along that deterioration pathway. So to me, I think that's a fairly easy document to complete, particularly at admission when you're gaining all that information, and it really is just a tick box of those general indicators for deteriorating health status. Then looking at your clinical indicators, I know some of the staff in some of the facilities I've been working with have found this a little bit difficult to complete, and on admission, you may not complete any of those clinical indicators because there may be none there to complete. You may just have some general signs of deterioration, you may not. So the clinical indicators may come in certainly later on in the process when you're completing it at time of deterioration. And again, I think they are fairly self-explanatory. For example, if you've got someone with respiratory disease, they've got increased breathlessness at rest and on minimal effort, and so forth. So you'd be ticking that. They're needing more oxygen long term, so you'd be ticking that. So I think from a registered nurse perspective, these indicators are fairly simple for you to be able to tick those boxes. Then your trigger comes in. What is it telling me? What do I need to do? And that's the bottom right-hand corner. And I can't stress enough that this is the very, very important part of this document, that you need to look at what advanced care planning have we got in place. Do we need to review treatments, medications? Do we need to consider a referral to specialist services? Do we need to sit down and have a conversation and complete another advanced care plan so that we're planning well ahead and everything's in place? Things are possibly changing, your residents deteriorating, so it's that conversation that things are changing and we really need to get this well documented so we've got a plan in place. So you've completed the SPICT, iCare progress note, what's it telling you, what are you doing, you're looking at what they've got in place, what do we need to do about this? So I think really that's a fairly simple tool to use at admission as a baseline, at all times of deterioration and at review. I've got a question here about the surprise question. And again, with your documentation in the progress notes, it is something that you would document that I would not be surprised if this resident dies in the next 12 months. No one's going to hold you to that, but it's something that just supports your review of what's actually in place and where that resident may sit on that disease trajectory. Nobody's going to go back in the progress notes and say, oh, Meredith said 12 months ago that this resident would die in the next 12 months. It's really something to support you with your decision making and having a really good look at what we have in place. So that's the SPICT and the surprise question. Now, just moving on to My Life's Decisions is the next document, and you've probably got that in amongst your documents. It's quite a lengthy document. It's a bit like the Advanced Care Directive. It's got a lot of information there about how to complete it, when to complete it, what the information is that is required. The pages that you really need to look at the last two pages are what you will be, the last 3 pages, sorry, are what you will be completing. The My Life's Decisions, because it was developed by Margaret Brown, who's an academic, she was also involved in the Advanced Care Directive Act. So the My Life's Decisions is very, very much based on the Advanced Care Directive, but is based in a supported decision-making framework so that your family can help your resident make those decisions. And again, as I said, it's about the voice and the choice of the resident. Accreditation really, really aligns very much with a supported decision-making framework. How have you involved your resident in this decision-making? You haven't just defaulted to the family, you've involved the resident, and how have you actually got the family to stand in the resident's shoes and make the decision, or assist the resident to make that decision, or if the resident can't make that decision, they're making that decision on what their mother, father, or whomever their loved one is would have made. What would your mother say to me if she could speak to me now in these circumstances? And it may have been a conversation that has been had years ago where Aunt Mary has died and, well, I wouldn't like to be like that and so forth. And that may have been all the conversation was, but it's getting that family member to stand in those resident shoes. And I know it sounds, you know, it's easy for me to say that. You have family who have a lot of conflict sometimes and they don't see eye to eye, and the resident has really not discussed it with family, and it becomes very, very difficult. But it's important to always bring it back to the resident. We're here to discuss what's important for your mother, not what you think you might like. And I can't stress that enough. So just looking at My Life's Decisions, on the pages there where we've got values and wishes, what I want. So as I said, we sit down and we have a very casual conversation with the resident. We've encouraged our lead nurses not to even take the document in with them. Organise a time with the family and say to them, look, you know, I'm going to be writing a little bit down because I'm really needing to be very clear about what your preferences, etc. are. So I'm going to be writing a bit, but you're not actually filling out a document. And this is a very casual conversation, starting off by getting to know a little bit about your resident, you know, and I've given you a few guiding questions there that support the My Life's Decisions. So what do they want? What's important to you? What's important to you now? What makes your day? Tell me a bit about yourself. What have you done in the past? What interests have you got? So just coming in with a very broad conversation to set the scene. And quite often that will lead on to a lot of other things, rather than on day of admission asking the resident, do you want to be resuscitated or do you not? And I know that you probably don't quite ask the question in that vein, but unfortunately quite often it is, because we need to know resuscitation status. Well, I've got to say to you, on day of admission, if there is no documentation of any kind, and sometimes that conversation will come up, and that's fine, but asking family and resident on day of admission resuscitation questions, I think is not appropriate. And if there isn't any direction there for around resuscitation and transfer to hospital, well, then the person is resuscitated or transferred to hospital until you have directions otherwise. And again, I'm not sure how that aligns with what you do there at Kalara, but I think you need to be very clear. Asking those questions at day of admission without some good context to underpin it ends up with a very emotional response from family and residents. And quite often that has then sat on the residents' notes forever. They want to be resuscitated, and nobody has ever really sat down and had the conversation. So it's really important that with My Life's Decisions, this will lead into that conversation, but you're starting initially to set the scene and ask those very general questions from the resident, what they might like, what they don't like. And you may get a number of things coming forward, and health issues may certainly be a part of what I don't like. Just looking at the boxes just below each of those questions, it's got type of decision made. And this is where it's really important. Some residents can verbalise to you what's important to them. So that question may be totally self-determined. They might be able to tell you all the things that are really important to them. They may not be able to tell you them all. They might be looking to their loved one to do that, and that would be a collaborative approach. They may be able to tell you some things, but they can't tell you everything. So you would tick the collaborative approach box if that were the case. You would tick the self-determined if they were able to tell you everything. Then you've got the residents who are not able to communicate at all to you, and your substitute decision maker would then be the person that would give you those answers, standing in the resident's shoes. So that again really is that real supported decision-making framework that is so important for accreditation, and it's really good evidence that you have tried where possible to incorporate your resident into those discussions. And I know that there are some residents that it's not going to be appropriate for them to come to a family meeting. And sometimes I know Meredith has, and the other lead nurses have gone and sat down and had a discussion with the resident themselves. And then the meeting is then with the family, and you can then reflect back to that to the family. I had a little talk with Mum, and this is what she said. You know, family will sometimes say, look, I really don't want Mum there. We really need to be very clear about what the reasons are why that should not be. But there are times when it is difficult for the resident to be a part of that meeting, but we still need to have the resident as a central point. So healthcare, you know, what do I want? So just a broad conversation. Tell us about your health. How have you been lately? Have you had any hospital admissions? How did you find that? You know, those really nice broad conversations, and what you'll get out of that will be a lot more information in many situations than you might find. So tell me about your previous experiences with hospital. You know, what sort of treatment are you currently having? What might that look like into the future? And if you had serious illness, how might you like to be treated? I think particularly with new residents coming in, it's really important to try and put things into the future. At such time as you become sick, what might you like then? I think if you're discussing it in the present time, particularly at time of admission, residents think, oh, I'm going to die now, you know, that I've come here and I'm going to die. They're wanting to know all this information. So putting it into the future. And in that conversation can come in about, have you thought about resuscitation? A lot of this is about sitting back and getting the resident or the family to answer your question. It's not about us as nurses giving a pile of information asking those short questions and letting the resident and family talk, and you'll get a lot more information that way rather than going into a lot of depth and then people get very confused and they don't want to talk. So those very short little questions are very, very good. And if you're having difficulty about what somebody's wanting, there's nothing wrong with saying, help me understand that. Let me unpack that a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about that, so that you're getting all of that, that information from the resident. And what care that I want, sorry. So just a little bit of information about how they're feeling about their current situation. A lot of them would be feeling very anxious and stressed and maybe not wanting to be in a residential care environment, but just getting to know what's really important to them. And the other personal arrangements, and that can take into account anything that may be funeral arrangements, things that the resident might want when they're dying. Yeah, a number of different things that you gain from your resident. Any personal preferences that they might have as their health deteriorates. And their dying wishes. And again, if you haven't got some of that information from earlier, framing it in the future. And at such time as you were dying, what might be important to you then? And getting those answers from them to tell you what they're thinking about, what they might like at that point in time. So it's really that very broad conversation. So the lead nurse is having that conversation with the family in a relaxed environment, then going away and filling out that form, taking a few notes as they go along, then filling out My Life's Decisions, which can be done in an electronic way or in a hard copy, and then giving it back to the family or back to the resident preferably. But if the family have supported the resident with that, well, then maybe the family will sign it off. And signing it off, giving it back to you, and then that copy is then filed away as your plan for your resident for the near future. Again, this is an ongoing conversation and it's something that we need to go back and review. Advanced care planning is not a one-off, it is a constant ongoing conversation. And then that information from that My Life's Decisions can then be transcribed across onto the 7-step pathway. We've tried with the lead nurses to build up a really good rapport with the GPs so that they know the GPs understand that these very in-depth conversations have been had. The residents' preferences and wishes have been talked through and their preferences for future health decisions, etc. And that's been translated onto the 7-step pathway, which is really a clinical document around resuscitation and transfer to hospital. And the GP then would feel happy to sign off on that. Some GPs will want to go and sit down and discuss with the resident themselves, that's fine. If the GP wants to be involved in your advanced care planning meeting, that's fine too. But I think the GP involvement is more around that trajectory of disease and what that might look like. But in most cases, we've found that the GPs have been happy to sign off on that 7-step pathway, knowing that the lead nurses have had a very, very good in-depth conversation with the resident, and that 7-step pathway is reflecting that conversation. How are we going for time? Okay, so just moving forward on that. I've just lost my little prompts here. Here we go. So the 7-step pathway, I think we've talked fairly well about that. You should have a copy of that. It really is a clinical document, and it is a document that really needs a good conversation and context to underpin it. I know often in the acute setting, I know when I was a manager myself, residents would come back to the facility with one of these documents completed. They knew nothing about it, family knew nothing about it, and they'd come back with a not for resuscitation document and please don't transfer this resident back to hospital again. And there was no conversation around that. So that's why it's so important to be having those conversations that then overlay your 7-step pathway. And in residential aged care, you use the community version of the 7-step pathway, not the version that's used in the acute setting. And if somebody came back from an acute setting with a 7-step pathway and you were having those conversations, I would be getting the GP to sign off on the community version of the pathway so that you've got something that reflects what's happening at that point in time. And it is very, very clear that there's been a good conversation that underpins the decisions on that pathway. Just following on from that, the end-of-life care pathway, I'm not going into detail with this. You haven't got a copy of it with your documentation there, but it's something that you would be using in the last few days to week or so of the resident's life. It's a very, very comprehensive document for you to record symptoms on, treatments, etc. It shouldn't be a document that continues on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I have found that in some facilities, a resident has had quite a considerable decline and it's felt that possibly they are at end of life and a end of life care pathway has been commenced. And then some weeks later, it's still there. It really is for that last week or so of the resident's life. And if they recover or you know, they're not at end of life, then you need to cease that pathway and you commence it again if they have another episode and you think they're at end of life at that point in time. After death audit is a document that we have been completing, or Meredith has been completing, after every resident has died. It's really important to have feedback on how well you've managed, what's actually happened in that process, and are there ways that we can improve? And that's what the after death audit is. It's something that will identify any themes that you might have that are coming through regularly in your processes and can feed into your quality improvement. I've given you some information there on CPR because I know we all have different views, and I think that it will help you with your discussions around CPR. It's a document that could occasionally be given to a family member if you felt it was appropriate, where they were having difficulty in understanding resuscitation. It's not something that you would hand out generally, but there may be that time when it might be appropriate for you to do that. So I've included that document in with your information there. So really just, I'm going to summarise and then I'll answer any questions. I've given you some links there that are very, very helpful links. There's some very good online training on LDAC, Palliaged Care, Care Search. There's an amazing amount of information out there that you can do. If any of you are keen on doing a degree in palliative care or your master's, Flinders University is probably the only place really, as far as I'm concerned, to be doing that. So we've certainly got some great opportunities there. So moving forward, just summarising up, advanced care planning is an ongoing conversation. It is not a set and forget. To implement a sustainable process, we've got the step-by-step procedure and it must be followed. And it must become business as usual, as we have with all other assessments. It's just incorporated into your general practice. You must always be very familiar with all of your residents' advanced care plans and where do you find them. And that they are always, the document that is stored is always up to date. Check at any time there is a health status change or an acute event, always refer to your advanced care plan, and they must be reviewed regularly. So just moving forward, the funding for the project was extended till the end of October, and then there has been further funding for the project until the end of June next year. I'm going to be working with a lesser number of facilities as a part of that project moving forward. Some of them are large organisations where I'll be working with 1 or 2 lead nurses so that we can get it embedded across every single facility within their organisations. I think it's really important that we get this business as usual. So the ongoing funding will be to build on activity that we've already put in place, and there may be opportunity for more activity, especially around end of life. We did quite a lot of training as a part of the project with Dr. David Holden from the Northern Adelaide Palliative Care Service. He did some Vital Talk training. We're going to be following up with all staff that initially attended that training, and I know a number of Kalara staff came, and we're following up with that training early in the new year. And there will be opportunity there for other staff to do the Vital Talk training as well. And that's very much based on building confidence for you as registered nurses around having those conversations. So you'll see me around the place. I'll be there to support Meredith and there to support you through this process moving forward so that we can really, really get it embedded. But just remember, you guys are the doers. You'll be the doers in the process, other than Meredith will be conducting those conversations at the moment until we get a number of you trained up to be able to do that. And she will be there to support you through the process, and I will be supporting her. Are there any questions in the chat box? I think I've answered what has come up there. So it says, is the surprise question confidential due to its nature? And it's not. It is really, as I said before, it is how you feel about whether that resident will die in the next 12 months or not. And it's not something that someone's going to hold you to. Any other questions? Please fill out your evaluations. As I said, this is a very, very different way of conducting training. It's been new for me. I really prefer a face-to-face approach, but I appreciate you all providing your time to be able to do this. And just it's been absolutely amazing, and to be able to get you all together for training. And also you've got an amazing lead nurse with Meredith, and it's been great working with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Got one other thing here. I'm currently reviewing our palliative care policy and procedure. Would it be something you could assist with to incorporate this into everyday business? Yeah, look, I'll work with Meredith. Meredith and I have had some discussion around the policy and procedure, etc., and we'll certainly be looking at that. So that's not a problem. Yep. Good.
Just want to thank you so much, Lynn, again, for very informative and wonderful for everyone. And I'll follow through if there's any questions, if anyone else would like to talk to me. And yeah, just appreciate your time on this. It's great.
Thanks a million, Meredith. And I appreciate the commitment and the wonderful staff that are working at Kalara. And I think we can just do it that little bit better with getting a really good process in place. Thanks a million. And thank you so much to Margot, who has put a lot of time into setting all of this up and making sure everybody was online and so forth. Really appreciate that, Margot. And thanks a lot, Meredith.
I apologise for the many emails that people might have got last night. Oops.
Oh, well, not to worry. At least we got everybody here, so that's a really good starting point. I've had a bit of difficulty with some facilities, and this has been very well organised and well run, and I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.